My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye before the will was read and called me dead weight. She smiled because she thought she was about to inherit everything. But when the lawyer opened the envelope my husband and I sealed years ago, her smile fell. She never saw the exclusion clause. Before I tell you what happened in that room, let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Marianne Halloway. I'm 62 years old, a widow, and until a few months ago, I was married to Edward, the love of my life. He was strong, thoughtful, and the kind of man who always thought 3 steps ahead. Losing him was the hardest thing I have ever gone through. After his funeral, I thought my family would come together. Instead, I found myself facing something I never expected, my own daughter-in-law turning cold and cruel. Her name is Clara. On the outside, Clara is the kind of woman people admire, stylish, smart, and always smiling. But once Edward was gone, her smile turned into something sharper. She began to speak to me as if I was in her way, as if my years with Edward didn't matter. One night, as I was quietly sitting in the living room, she leaned over and said, "You've had your time, Marianne. Daniel and I will take care of everything now." Daniel is my only son. He's 36, and he tries to keep the peace, but when Clara speaks, he stays silent. That silence hurt almost as much as Clara's words. I was grieving my husband, but at the same time, I felt myself shrinking in my own home. Clara treated me like I was a guest who had overstayed my welcome. She started making little comments like, "It must be hard being alone now. Maybe you should think about moving into a smaller place." It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, like I had no right to stay where I was. I kept quiet, but inside I was breaking. She thought I was powerless. What she didn't know was that Edward had left behind something she could never take from me. Clara's attitude toward me only grew sharper as the days passed after Edward's funeral. At first, I thought it was my grief making me overly sensitive. I told myself maybe I was reading too much into her words, that maybe she didn't mean to sound so dismissive. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. She began speaking about the house, my home of 35 years, as if it already belonged to her. One morning, I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends. I was in the kitchen pouring myself a cup of tea when I heard her laughing in the dining room. Her voice was light and casual, but her words pierced through me like a knife. "Yes, we'll have to remodel the place once everything's settled," she said. "Daniel wants to keep some of the old furniture, but I told him it's time for a fresh start. This house is about to be ours. Marianne will understand." She said my name like I was nothing more than a temporary guest, a problem that would soon be solved. I stood frozen, holding my teacup, feeling the weight of her certainty pressing down on me. My husband's chair was still at the head of the table, his scent still lingering in the closet, and yet here was Clara already erasing me from the picture. When Daniel came home that evening, I tried to bring it up gently. "Daniel," I said, "Clara was talking about remodeling the house today. Is that really what she wants to do?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "Mom, don't take it personally. Clara just likes planning things. She didn't mean it that way, but I knew better. Clara always meant what she said. She just dressed her intentions in a way that made Daniel believe she was only being practical. I could feel the wedge she was driving between us, and it terrified me. I had already lost my husband. Was I now losing my son too? Clara's disrespect soon stopped being subtle. One afternoon, she came into the living room while I was folding laundry. She looked at me, then at the clothes in my hands, and let out a sharp laugh. "You really don't have to do that anymore," she said. "Daniel and I can hire someone. You don't need to keep acting like you're part of this household. Just take care of yourself." I stared at her, unable to find words at first. "This is my home too," I finally whispered. Her smile faded for a split second, then returned, colder than before. "It won't be for long. Don't make this harder than it has to be." That night I cried alone in my bedroom. Edward had always been the protector, the one who made me feel safe, and now I felt like I was fighting a quiet war I never asked for. Clara's confidence grew by the day, and it became clear why. She believed, without a doubt, that the will was going to hand everything to her and Daniel. To her, I was already erased, a widow with no power. And Daniel, my sweet boy, he sat in silence through it all. Whenever Clara spoke sharply to me, he would lower his eyes or change the subject. His silence hurt worse than her words. It was as if the son I raised, the boy who once clung to my hand when he was scared, was now too afraid to stand against his wife's cruelty. The day before the will reading, Clara cornered me in the hallway. She looked directly into my eyes and said, "You need to prepare yourself. When the papers are signed, things are going to change. You won't have to worry about anything anymore, because you won't have to be here. We'll take care of it." Her words weren't just dismissive, they were final, like a sentence being handed down. She truly believed I was about to be pushed out of the life Edward and I had built together. And for the first time, I felt the heat of anger rise in me, stronger than my grief. But I also remembered Edward's voice. Years ago, he had looked at me with the steady calm only he had and said, "I know you don't want to think about this now, Marianne, but promise me something. If anything happens to me, you'll trust what we've put in place. Don't argue with her. Don't let her know what's coming. Just wait. The truth will protect you." So, I stayed quiet. I let Clara think she had won. I let her treat me like I was invisible, because deep down, I carried the memory of that sealed envelope. Clara had no idea what was waiting for her when we walked into that lawyer's office. She called me deadweight that morning, right before we left. Her words burned, but I held my head high. I may have looked powerless in her eyes, but I knew something she didn't, and that secret gave me the strength to face what was coming. The morning of the will reading felt heavy, as though the air itself was pressing against me. I woke up early, unable to sleep. Edward's side of the bed was still empty, the imprint of him long gone, but my memory filled the space. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, hearing his voice in my mind. "Trust what we've put in place, Marianne," he had said. "Don't show your hand too soon." That memory carried me through the fog of grief that still surrounded me. Clara, however, had no fog. She carried herself as if this was her victory lap. At breakfast, she was practically glowing. She sat across from me at the table, her phone in her hand, scrolling and smiling. "You know, Daniel," she said loudly, as if I wasn't even in the room. "Once the papers are signed, we should start looking at contractors right away. This place has so much potential if we open up the walls. It'll finally feel like ours." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but said nothing. He looked at me once, almost guiltily, then back down at his coffee. Clara caught his glance and leaned in with a smirk. "Don't worry, darling. We'll take care of everything. Your mother can finally rest. She's carried enough." Her words were sharp and sweet at the same time, the kind of cruelty that hides under a thin layer of politeness. To anyone else, it might have sounded caring. To me, it sounded like eviction. My hands tightened around my teacup, but I stayed quiet. Edward had prepared me for this. He had known Clara's true nature even when I wanted to believe otherwise. Later that morning, as I got ready, I opened Edward's desk drawer. Inside was the leather-bound folder he always used for important papers. My hand brushed over it, and for a moment, the grief came back full force. I remembered the night we signed the sealed letter together. Edward had placed his hand over mine and said, "This is for you, Marianne, for us. No matter what happens, this ensures you're safe." I could almost feel his presence beside me, urging me to stand strong. Clara wanted me to look beaten, to walk into that lawyer's office with fear on my face. But I decided then and there that I would not give her that satisfaction. I would walk in with quiet dignity. I would let her believe she had won, because her arrogance was about to be her downfall. When it was time to leave, Clara appeared at my bedroom door. She looked me up and down with a mocking smile. "You're ready? Good. Don't worry, Marianne. This will all be over soon." She paused, then leaned closer. "Honestly, you should be grateful. We're going to take such good care of things. You don't need to carry any of this anymore." I wanted to tell her the truth right then, to wipe that smug grin from her face. But Edward's voice echoed in my memory again, steady and sure. "Wait, let her show who she really is." So I bit back the words, gave her a small nod, and walked past her without another glance. The ride to the lawyer's office was silent. Daniel drove, his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles tight on the steering wheel. Clara sat in the passenger seat, humming softly, as if this was the happiest day of her life. I sat in the back, staring out the window, watching the trees blur by. My stomach was in knots, but my heart carried a quiet strength. When we arrived, the lawyer, Mr. Keller, greeted us warmly. He was an older man, calm and precise, the kind who never wasted words. As he shook my hand, his eyes met mine for a moment, and I knew he remembered everything Edward had told him. That look alone gave me reassurance. We sat down at the long wooden table, papers neatly stacked in front of Mr. Keller. Clara leaned forward eagerly, her hands clasped together like a child about to open presents. Daniel sat stiffly beside her, clearly uncomfortable, but too hesitant to stop her enthusiasm. I sat across from them, my hands folded in my lap, forcing myself to stay calm. Clara glanced at me with a satisfied smirk. "Don't worry, Marianne. We'll make sure you're taken care of. You won't have to stress about anything after today." I held her gaze and gave the faintest smile, not because her words comforted me, but because I knew the truth she didn't. That was my turning point. I had made my choice. I would let Clara's arrogance build unchecked. Let her dig her own grave with every smug word. I would sit quietly through the lawyer's reading, because when the sealed envelope was opened, everything would shift. In that moment, I stopped feeling powerless. I stopped letting her words crush me. Edward had left me the gift of foresight, and I chose to honor it. Clara thought today was her triumph. She had no idea it was the day her mask would finally fall. The air inside Mr. Keller's office was thick with silence. The heavy curtains blocked out most of the sunlight, leaving the room lit only by the brass desk lamp and the faint glow from the window behind him. Papers lay neatly stacked before him, and his old fountain pen rested across the top page, as if waiting for the moment to strike. I sat across from him, my hands folded tightly in my lap. My heart thumped so loudly, I wondered if Daniel or Clara could hear it. Daniel sat stiff beside his wife, his eyes fixed on the polished table. Clara, though, leaned forward like a queen waiting for her crown. Her smile hadn't wavered since we walked in. She was glowing with certainty, her chin lifted as though this entire room belonged to her. Mr. Keller cleared his throat. His voice was steady, practiced, the voice of a man who had read hundreds of wills. But today, every word landed like a stone in water. "We are gathered here to carry out the wishes of the late Edward Halloway," he began. "As you know, he prepared his will carefully, with clear instructions on how his estate is to be distributed." Clara squeezed Daniel's hand under the table. I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She looked almost giddy, like a child about to unwrap gifts at Christmas. She whispered, barely hiding her excitement, "It's starting." Mr. Keller continued, reading the initial clauses, the usual formalities. Edward had left small bequests to a charity he supported, and tokens to a few friends. Clara's smile didn't waver. She was waiting for the big part. Then came the property and assets. "The Halloway residence, along with its contents, is to remain in the family," Mr. Keller read. Clara's lips curled into a victorious grin. She shot me a glance, as though to say, "See? It's mine now." I kept my face calm, though inside, a storm was raging. Mr. Keller went on, his tone unwavering. "All financial holdings, including accounts, investments, and properties, are to be managed according to the wishes of the decedent, with direct beneficiaries listed herein." He paused, adjusting his glasses, and then reached for the sealed envelope that had been resting to the side. The sound of the paper tearing open echoed in the room. My breath caught in my throat. This was the moment Edward had prepared me for. Clara's smile widened. She leaned forward so far that Daniel had to put a hand on her arm to hold her back. Mr. Keller unfolded the letter slowly and read aloud. "As per the decedent's instructions, the following clause is to be recognized as legally binding. In the event of my passing, I hereby exclude Clara Halloway from receiving, either directly or indirectly, any part of my estate. She is not to benefit from the distribution of property, assets, or inheritance in any capacity." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Clara's smile froze. For the first time, I saw cracks forming in her perfect mask. Her eyes widened, and her hand slipped from Daniel's. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mr. Keller did not pause. He continued reading. "This exclusion clause is included with full intent and knowledge. It is based on observed behavior and actions that, in my judgment, do not reflect the values with which I built my life and family. The estate is to pass to my wife, Marianne Holloway, with full rights to remain in the family home and manage assets as she sees fit. My son, Daniel, will also be provided for, under the condition that such provisions cannot be accessed or controlled by his spouse. Daniel's head shot up at that. His mouth opened as though to speak, but no words came out. He turned to Clara, who now sat pale and rigid, her smile gone, her jaw clenched. "This isn't real," she muttered. "He wouldn't do this." "He loved me. He said. Her voice broke, and she turned to Daniel, desperate. "Tell him, Daniel. Tell him this isn't right." But Daniel said nothing. He looked at me, then at the lawyer, then back at Clara. His silence was louder than words. Clara slammed her hand against the table. "This is a trick. She pointed at me, her finger shaking. "She made you do this." Mr. Keller remained calm. "Mrs. Holloway, this clause was prepared years ago, witnessed and signed by both Edward and myself. It was his decision, and his alone." The room fell silent again, but the silence was different now. Before, it had been filled with Clara's confidence. Now, it was heavy with her defeat. I lifted my eyes and looked directly at her. For the first time, she couldn't hold my gaze. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Clara, I didn't know. I had no idea." Clara pushed back her chair so violently it screeched across the floor. She stood, her face red, her hands trembling. "This isn't over," she spat, and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed, then faded into silence. Daniel sat frozen, his shoulders slumped. I sat still, my hands no longer shaking. For the first time in weeks, I felt a calmness wash over me. Edward had kept his promise. He had protected me, even in death. The balance of power had shifted completely. Clara had walked into that room with victory written all over her face. She left it stripped of everything she thought she had. When the door slammed behind Clara, the silence left in its wake was almost deafening. For a long moment, none of us spoke. I sat there in Mr. Keller's office, my hands resting on the polished wood table, and felt the weight of the past few weeks sliding off my shoulders. The air, once heavy with Clara's smug confidence, now felt lighter, almost breathable again. Daniel still hadn't moved. He was staring down at his hands, his face pale, his expression caught somewhere between shock and shame. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Did you know about this?" I nodded slowly. "Your father prepared it years ago. He wanted to make sure I would be safe." Daniel swallowed hard. "Safe from her?" His voice cracked on the last word. "Yes," I said quietly. "He saw the way she treated me, even when I tried to ignore it. He didn't want me left with nothing if she decided to push me out. He loved you, Daniel, but he couldn't trust the way she looked at me, or at him." Daniel dropped his head into his hands. I could see the realization sinking in, his silence all those years, the moments he let Clara speak for both of them, the way he looked away whenever she dismissed me. Now it was catching up to him, and there was no undoing the damage. "I should have stopped her," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I should have stood up for you." I reached across the table and laid my hand over his. "You're my son. I don't hate you. I just hope now you see her for who she truly is." He nodded, tears shining in his eyes. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was looking at my son again, not Clara's husband, not her silent shadow, but the boy I had raised, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees and wide eyes. Mr. Keller cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Holloway, all documents are in order. The estate is secure under your name. Daniel's share will remain protected from outside interference, exactly as Edward instructed." I thanked him, my voice steadier than I expected. The paperwork, the signatures, the legal language, all of it was important. But what mattered most in that moment was that Edward's plan had worked. He had seen Clara clearly long before I wanted to, and his foresight gave me the shield I needed when I was at my weakest. As Daniel and I left the office, I could feel eyes on us. Clara hadn't gone far. She was standing outside, pacing the hallway, her arms crossed tightly. When she saw us, she rushed forward, her voice sharp and frantic. "Daniel, you can't just let this happen. This is your inheritance too. She can't cut me out like this." She jabbed her finger toward me, her face twisted with anger. Daniel stopped and stared at her, something new in his expression. His voice was quiet, but firm. "Clara, Dad saw who you really were. I see it now too." Her mouth fell open, but no words came. For the first time, Clara had no clever remark, no fake smile, no manipulation to fall back on. She turned on her heel and stormed down the hallway, her footsteps echoing until they faded completely. I stood there in the quiet with my son. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel powerless. I felt protected, even in Edward's absence, and I felt stronger because I had chosen patience over anger, silence over fighting, and in the end, the truth had spoken louder than Clara ever could. In the days that followed, Clara packed her things and left our home. She tried to call Daniel countless times, but he didn't answer. Eventually, she stopped. The house, once filled with her cold remarks and cutting smiles, grew peaceful again. I still missed Edward every single day. His laugh, his steady presence, the way he always knew how to calm me with a single touch. I missed it all. But his love had lived on in the choices he made, in the foresight that protected me, even after he was gone. That was his last gift to me, and it was worth more than any money or property. When I walked through the rooms of our home, I no longer felt like a shadow in my own life. I felt like the rightful keeper of the memories Edward and I had built together. Clara had expected to take it all, but what she never understood was that this home was not just walls and furniture. It was love, history, and a life built on trust. She could never touch that. Looking back, I realized something important. Sometimes, people show their true selves only when they think they've already won. Clara believed she was untouchable, and that arrogance was her undoing. Edward saw it, and he made sure I would not be left at her mercy. The lesson I carry now is simple. Love that protects, even beyond death, is the strongest kind of love. And silence, when guided by wisdom, can be more powerful than any argument. So if you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or treated as if you don't matter, remember this. Your worth isn't defined by those who try to diminish you. It's defined by the people who see you, who protect you, and who honor your place in their lives. That's the real inheritance we leave behind. And as I sit in the quiet of my home, I don't think about Clara's smile or her cruel words anymore. I think about Edward's voice, steady and kind, saying, "You'll be safe, Marianne. Always, he was right." If you were moved by this story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more powerful life stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know.